Hello everybody and welcome to another video. So 2 days ago I asked on Twitter, hey guys, what do you want to see for the next Heart of Thorns video? And I believe the Revenant won out just ahead of some of the other topics. So let's talk about the Revenant today. What I intend to do is explain everything we know about the class so far, which is very minimal, I must be honest, including not just information from the original PAX weekend, but also some of the various interviews that have come out since then, and also to talk to you guys a little bit more about where the Revenant could go and speculate on the various aspects of the class. So if you are completely out of the loop, to lay it down on the line, Guild Wars 2 has always had just 8 classes. It has had 3 light armors, also known as scholars. It's had 3 medium armors, known as adventurers, but only 2 heavy armors or soldier classes. The third and final heavy armor class will be added with Heart of Thorns. Before this announcement was even made clear to us, it seemed very likely they'd add a new class, and it also seemed very likely that if they ever should do such a thing, it would fill this final mechanical niche out there in the game, the final heavy. I find it very interesting that the Revenant is being added now. I remember specifically at launch, a lot of discussion from the developers and interviews coming out talking about their early designs for classes in Guild Wars 2 and how they had like systems in early days where there were maybe 12 classes or 15 classes or even more higher bizarre numbers, where they were trying to hit pretty much every single like thematic threshold you could think of, and ultimately they worked themselves down into 8, and they said to themselves that these were like the perfect 8 almost, or this is how they made it sound, that they thought they'd hit everything already, and now we do finally have a new class. I wonder whether they had always known they were going to add this third heavy, because it always did look a little bit lopsided, right? No one's asked them this in an interview yet, but I'd be curious as to way back when Guild Wars 2 first launched, they always knew the Revenant would be in the wings. So this is going to be our third heavy. The 2 existing heavies in Guild Wars 2 are very well suited to the various game types out there. Guardian sees heavy use across all 3, the Warrior sees heavy use across all 3, and hopefully the Revenant will slot nicely into this also, and not be some ridiculously overpowered monster compared to all the other classes. I really don't think it would benefit ArenaNet that much to create the Revenant as some insanely OP thing. Thematically, the Revenant seems to be a blend of 3 existing classes in this franchise. The Warrior, who we've seen in Guild Wars 2, but also the Dervish, who in the first game could channel the powers of the human gods, transform his form entirely, and gain very different stats and bonuses depending on the god that they were channeling, transforming their appearance entirely. And also the Ritualist from the first game, who was a channeler of the underworld, a channeler of the mists, tapped into magics that we don't necessarily use in Guild Wars 2, would call of their ancestors, famous, powerful Acanthan heroes of long years past. And all 3 of these classes, like all jumbled in together, I would say you probably get something like the Revenant. So, in terms of mechanics, they have stated that this class, just like most other Guild Wars 2 classes, is designed from a top level to be able to fill multiple roles. Like, one of the ways they always wanted to battle the Trinity was they still wanted synergy and roles that people could be in, but the idea was that you wouldn't be forced to play a totally different class, that your class could fill multiple roles should it have to, and that's why you can see sort of supportive elements spread across all characters, even though it's unnecessary in practice. So it's quite useless to say, oh, the Revenant is just a tank. Now, we have heard that the Revenant basically can be a tank, but that doesn't mean it's a tank class. It also has other modes, which I'll describe very shortly, that can change its capabilities into perhaps a more Condi-based character or a more supportive-based character. All of that said, they did want each class in Guild Wars 2 to lean a little bit more in certain directions. The Guardian was supposed to lean a little bit more in the supportive direction, for example. The Thief in the mobility, bursty direction, just a little bit more. And so where does the Revenant lean is probably the best question to ask. I'd like to say it should be some kind of like an attritive class. Though there are warrior specs, you know, you can't say, oh, the Revenant's a Condi class, because there are no good soldier Condi classes out there right now, because there are warrior specs out there that do phenomenally well for Condi. So, and they're constantly seemingly trying to push Guardian, though doing it in the wrong ways as some kind of Condi role, so we shall see. Anyway, I'm not too concerned about how it will slot into the game. This is more of a thematic thing for me, and something I am excited about. Let's talk about the name a little bit. The Revenant, basically, the most basic interpretation of this name that people are going to be thinking of is it's the idea of someone who has returned from the dead, or someone who has returned from a long absence. I actually think there's quite a strong thematic tie to the stories we're seeing going forwards in Heart of Thorns, or that they seem to be setting up, and the fact that the Revenant has just been added. You know, if you think of this idea of it's someone who returns after a very long absence, what other characters? We know that Ritlock Brimstone is going to be like the showcase for the Revenant straight away, but what other characters do we have out there who could become Revenant in the plot? This is something I found very interesting to think of. One of the main characters, if the Massart are coming back into the story, that could very well be some kind of immense, awesome boss or ally for us in this story, is the return of Saul D'Alessio, who was stolen away by the Massart, disappeared for a long time, possibly taken to the mists. Is that equivalent to death in this franchise? Not really, but he could return after a long absence, and we may finally get to interact with Saul D'Alessio again as a Revenant. Think about some of these other very exciting things people want to see. The idea of Avinia returning, the idea of Livia returning, the idea that either of these characters could be E, and E could be revealed in Heart of Thorns. These are characters that disappeared for a long time and have returned after a long absence. They could be Revenants. It's very exciting. And just think about the Massart themselves as a race in general, right? They've been away for oh so long, now they're back. It's kind of cool to me the way that this works. I also think it's kind of fun maybe to speculate about some prior Revenants in the franchise, but it kind of falls apart. You know, you can see like Master Togo in the first game would do very Revenant-y things, but then he was a Ritualist, and Ritualists are very Revenant-y, so we shall see. Another curious point then also that this is a merging of those three classes is maybe we won't ever really see a complete return of the Ritualist in this game, guys, or the Dervish. The Dervish I never thought was coming back. It's a far too human-centric class. It'd be difficult to, you know, have an Asuran Dervish, and so maybe this is their answer to that. People wanted these classes, they blended them together, and hopefully people will be happy. I do think that now that the Revenant exists, any new classes for future expansions even further down the line, I don't know whether the Ritualists will ever come back now, or the Dervish. So let's talk about the weapons that this class can use. Some stuff has been confirmed. Now, Wiki says that the Revenant can use a sword in his main hand, and that this has been confirmed. I missed the confirmation of this. Either that or I'm just blind and it flew right before my very eyes. I'll accept that, though. The other weapon that is very likely to be wieldable by the Revenant is a staff. Now, this was seen in the trailer. A few of us were mistaken because there was a lot of concept art, there was a lot of cool looking stuff that made it seem like Heart of Thorns was going to give people spears on land. This is confirmed to not be true. And even though it looks like Ritlock the Revenant is maybe using a spear in this trailer, you know, smashing people, it's not that at all. Instead, it looks very likely to instead be a staff. And you might think, oh, okay, another staff class, fine, that's kind of interesting. But if you really look at those animations, the way that Ritlock is wielding it, we actually have a character using a staff that is using it in a martial way. It's using it to physically hit people instead of cast magic. That is not something we've seen yet. That is something a lot of people have wanted. And so I think that's actually really, really cool. Let's think about what else the Revenant could use, though. The way I have decided on my speculations for the other weapons the Revenant could equip is to look at both the Guardian and the Warrior, the two other heavies, and see what weapons they can't equip. What weapons aren't in the arsenal of the soldiers' professions already. And these are the ones that we come up with. The pistol. Pistol is very likely, in my opinion, for the Revenant, especially considering the poster child for the Revenant right now, Ritlock Brimstone, is very famously using a pistol. Now, many Char use pistol. If you're any Char character out there in the game, in theory you get a utility skill called Hidden Pistol, and they're all, you know, they're all packing heat. But I think that really this could be a main part of the class now. Will it be dual wielding pistols? Will it just be main hand pistol, just offhand pistol? I'm unsure, I can only speculate. And the only other two weapons really that stand out to me are the dagger and the short bow. Warrior alone uses so many damn weapons. That's like one of the things about the Warrior in this game. It's ridiculous. So these are the other two we've got, and I think they're both probably quite likely, especially if you think about the range niche that the short bow could provide to the Revenant. That's something we don't see too much with the other two classes, so that could be pretty cool. I think these are all really likely. Here's another fun thing that not many people are speculating about. Yes, I know we don't care that much about underwater content, but what are the underwater weapons that the Revenant will be using? Well, the Warrior has a combination. They have the spear and the harpoon gun. The Guardian has the trident and the spear. So that would mean if the Revenant is going to have its own unique thing, the Revenant would be wielding underwater the trident and the harpoon gun. This, of course, doesn't address the fact that the Revenant could only have one weapon set. This is something you might come to expect because if you look at the light armor classes, They have 2 classes that can weapon swap and 1 that can't, the Elementalist. If you look at the medium armor classes, they have 2 classes that can weapon swap and 1 that can't, the Engineer. So is the Revenant going to be one that cannot? I would argue that this doesn't have to be the way things go, that they don't have to follow this pattern if it's not ultimately what makes the Revenant most fun. But if it did happen, it seems like it's kind of fitting in with their unique profession mechanic, which have been described as channels. And maybe this isn't the exact name that they'll go with eventually, but the idea is you're channeling heroes of the mists. So, more information has come out about this since PAX I'd like to talk to you guys about. Essentially what they're saying is, think of the way that Elementalists can swap attunements. Fire attunement will change their weapon skills to a certain set, then if they go into Water attunement, then it will change to a new set. Well, the Revenant is exactly like attunement, except it doesn't change your weapon skills, it changes your elite skill, your utility skills, and your healing skills. Now, the way this interacts with how you equip skills and stuff is totally up in the air. We could find that all of the utility skills for the Revenant essentially function like glyphs on the Elementalist do, in that they're like 4 skills in one every single time. Or you may find that the idea of channeling a hero has more permanence than we're expecting, and only certain utility skills are available on that drop-down list depending on what you are currently channeled to. Just the idea of it being called channeling to me suggests something that isn't as hot swappable as the Elementalist attunement system. I actually don't think that just because this is swapping the second 5 skills on your skill bar, it makes channels distinct enough from attunements. I think you Elementalists can swap attunements very freely. They can trait to drop the cooldowns of them. They just press the button and then they instantly swap, and it's all very fluid. I think what they're going to try and do to make the Revenant a bit more distinct is actually, as you channel these different heroes, it will take some time, and it is something you can do in combat, but it's not something you're going to do so freely and easily as an Elementalist would, for example. And so, with this in mind, I think the Revenant could still have weapon swaps, but this is speculation based upon speculation. Certainly sounds like a very interesting idea, and excited me a lot. It's like NG kits, but you're doing it with the whole other side of your skill bar, so you would get different elite skills, but depending on the different heroes that you're channeling. There's another interpretation of this perhaps that has it a lot more like the Dervish Avatar elite skills from the first game, where yes, you sort of channel into it, and then it's not like a permanent thing, it's like a duration, and you're going to be in this form for a while, and then you go back to your regular utility skills. And they haven't even confirmed how many, as far as I'm aware, different channels there will be available. I had 4 floating around in my head, but I've also seen a great deal of speculation online from people about the idea of it being like the pet system, and you get tons and tons and tons to choose, which I totally don't believe will happen, but it's interesting to think of how deep this system could go. And honestly, guys, I don't think we're going to get too much more information than that until they do the official reveal for the Revenant at whatever time as we roll up to the launch. However, I do have a little bit more I'd like to talk to you guys about in this video, and that's the idea of the heroes we can actually channel. Now, first of all, in the trailer, it looked like he was doing something like summoning Glint. Glint, of course, is going to be a part of the story here. They established that very, very quickly. But is Glint going to be something that Ritlock can channel? I do not believe so. I think this looks more like an elite that he's using, but hey, maybe Glint is one of these great heroes that the Revenant will be channeling. The 2 that have been confirmed are King Jarlis Ironhammer and Malix the Unyielding. These were both big, prominent characters from the first game. King Jarlis far more so. So I'll talk to you guys a little bit about them. King Jarlis, in the first game, we had the dwarves. Dwarves are, in the eyes of many Tyrians in modern Tyria, extinct almost. But King Jarlis, back then, there were many dwarves living on the Shiver Peaks where the Norn currently inhabit. And these dwarves were in civil war. They were the Deljamor dwarves fighting against the Stone Summit. And our first interaction with King Jarlis Ironhammer was when we, refugees from Ascalon, fleeing from the Char, tried to cross the northern Shiver Peaks, and Prince Rurik, our leader, ended up meeting with King Jarlis, and they sort of struck a deal. You help me with the Stone Summit, and I'll help you pass through the mountain. So he was basically set up to be this very just king, this very great king. Later on in the initial story of the game, we once again interacted with King Jarlis and participated in his war with him, and that was pretty much it for prophecies. We fast forward in time a little bit to Eye of the North, towards the concluding stories of Guild Wars 1, and the dwarves were revealed to be like a counter to Primordus's minions, the Destroyers. And this is still an interesting thing in the lore to me, but the dwarves had a legend. They said that the Great Destroyer, who was one of Primordus's champions, was destined to fight the Great Dwarf. And the Great Dwarf was revealed to be this giant hive mind dwarven entity that once the dwarves undertook a ritual, turned themselves to stone, they would be forever fighting against the Destroyers. And what this could mean for the other dragons and stuff is interesting enough, but the one who chose to undergo the rite of the Great Dwarf, the one who transformed his people, the Deldrimor dwarves, it was King Jarlath. And we saw at the end of the story, he turned himself and all of his companions to stone. Now, here's the interesting thing. We can channel him. So, what? Does this mean he is no longer of this world? Last we saw, he went to the depths of Tyria. I was maybe expecting us to interact with him once again. That's why we can still speak to Ogden Stonehealer, who was a character in the first game too, and that's how he survived all these years. I always thought, yeah, maybe King Jarlath could still be alive down there, but actually, if we're channeling him as a Revenant, and these are supposedly like long dead heroes, that doesn't sound very good for King Jarlath, does it, at all? Anyway, they did announce that if you are channeling King Jarlath, you're going to be a very, very tanky character. This is how you'll feel that kind of tanky role. And again, do consider this doesn't mean the class is a tank. It's just people can fill multiple roles. Then they talked about Malix the Unyielding. Malix is, it sounds like he's kind of a very Condi-heavy type role. They talked about specifically, I believe, transferring conditions from you to enemies, or from allies to enemies. Malix was less of a big character, really, in the story than King Jarlath, but Malix was essentially the big, bad, dangerous, difficult boss at the end of some of the best raid material that ArenaNet ever made for their game. One of the hardest things they ever did, especially when it first dropped, was the Domain of Anguish. And so the story here was we were in the Mists at this time, so this is already taking place in the Mists. We were fighting in Abaddon's realm, the Realm of Torment. And after Abaddon was defeated, it was revealed one of his great, powerful generals, commanders, was still left alive. This was Malix the Unyielding. Malix himself had 4 great champions who would defend him, and Malix resided in this great ebony citadel, this giant jet black tower in the depths of hell. It was an incredible place. Domain of Anguish is one of my favorite areas in the entire franchise. And he was a giant monkey. He was a giant Marganite purple monkey. And you could only fight him after you did tons of other stuff, difficult, really challenging content, and you would finally gain access to the Ebony Citadel. You'd have to defend yourself from tons of different enemies with all these different builds specifically designed to counter everything about the PvE meta at that time. And if you finally managed to survive, the gates would swing open. Very few players saw this, and you would fight Malix himself. And he was a dangerous, difficult boss if you did not go in there prepared. And now in Guild Wars 2, the Revenants will be able to channel this guy. And so I kind of asked the question with King Jarlath, does this mean he's dead? Well, it's kind of interesting, because now we're in the Mists already, so sure, why shouldn't we be able to channel Malix? But the interesting idea to me now is, like, could he still be alive, in a matter of speaking? Could he still be, he still has power to draw from? Very curious, right? Very, very, very curious, and I like the idea a lot. Who else could we get? Well, if they did one of the giant raid bosses from Guild Wars 1, maybe some of these other people will be able to channel. I immediately thought of Urgos. Urgos, again, was the big giant boss at the end of a very difficult, long raid mission, a 12-man mission that they designed in Guild Wars 1, called Urgos Warren. He was the corrupted spirit of the Echo-Vowed Forest. He was corrupted supposedly by the Jade Wind, which was unleashed by Shiro Togachi, and many speculate, myself included, that he may have been the equivalent of, like, the avatar of the Pale Tree, should there have been a Pale Tree and Sylvari and Wardens and so forth in the Echo-Vowed Forest in Cantha. And so since this is such a Sylvari-focused expansion, wouldn't it be pretty badass if we could channel Urgos to fight against Morgemoth? That would be seriously awesome. And again, if we're thinking about Urgos, the equivalent mission was over in the Jade Sea. Again, a very difficult, long 12-man instance where we fought the demon Kanaxai. Kanaxai, again, who seemed to have come from the mist with his army of Oni, corrupting poor Luxon miners, inflicting them with insanity, and just a generally really, really cool demon entity also that still has a lot of mystery about him. And that's pretty much all I have to say on the Revenant for now, though. I'll fill you guys in on the gaps as we progress further along to the release, and let me know if I've missed anything, but there's certainly some really exciting stuff about this class, right? I'm going to level my Guardian pretty soon, so I can be nice and ready to get that Revenant going as soon as Thorns drops. Anyway, thanks guys very much. Hope you're still feeling good about the X-Pack, and I guess I'll see you tomorrow.